Dr. Marylen Harmon is a retired educator of more than 30 years. A member of the Carver School's graduating class of 1966, she is a longtime community historian and activist. Her parents, Chauncey D. Harmon Sr. and Lucy Harmon, were taught at the Tuskegee Institute by George Washington Carver himself, and later became educators at the Salem area school, still bearing his name. Please give it up for Dr. Marylen Harmon.
Good morning, everybody.
I am not a perfect historian about Salem. Everybody has a story. I'm just going to tell what I know and what I grew up with. And then I'll let the others come and do part two and tell their story. But I did grow up in Salem under the tutelage of my parents, who clearly ran the house. But the people that I grew up with were certainly involved with the community. How many of you know where the Salem Rescue Squad is? Okay. The Salem Market, the fire department. All right, that's the area of where I grew up. That was called the Water Street District, not just Water Street, but Water Street District. The historic Water Street area was centered along what is now South Broad Street. They renamed Water Street to South Broad Street in the 70s. So many people who come to Salem from the past, they can't find Water Street. Where is Water Street? I'm lost. And so we have to say, look for South Broad. But during that time, in the 1800s, Mr. Nathaniel Burrell, who was a slave owner here in Salem, set aside land in his will so that African Americans could have historically a place to buy property and to live. And it was south of Maine. When I was growing up, we could not go north of Maine where the market is. It was against the law. And I'll tell you about some stories about when we disobeyed the law. But it was established in his will and it was carried out. So it was carried out in order to have businesses, people could buy land, people could have a wonderful place to live. And it was considered Salem's first major African-American district, south of Maine. And John Long wrote a book, and the book is called South of Maine, Salem, South of Maine. It included residential areas, businesses, and all of that. If you go to look at tax tickets and all, it can be called Throckmorton District, or it can be called Broadway. And in many cases, artists and all portrayed Water Street and sent the pictures up to New York, and it looked like Broadway because it was so businesslike back in the 1800s. And people from New York and all came down to see Broadway. They actually caught trains to come to Broadway, and it was Water Street. It was that land, fortunately, Mr. Burrell saw that African Americans, even though he had slaves, they should have a place to have as their own. Our community, as I was growing up, was surrounded by laborers, doctors, electricians, educators, religious leaders, and just plain caring people. Some of them we call busybodies and reporters. I'm not talking about journalists. I'm talking about telling on you. They told on us. But thank goodness we had those people in our lives. A while ago, I was just talking with someone, and she grew up in Salem, and we were talking about Reverend Smith, and Reverend Smith was the pastor at First Baptist. And I sat on Reverend Smith's porch as much as I sat on our porch. And followed around to the Baptist conventions and things with Reverend and Mrs. Smith. So the community was interconnected, but the children had their place. Clearly, we knew adults were in control. Sometimes we kind of wish they didn't, but they clearly kept us intact. But we were raised to be respectful to the elders. And there were and everybody seemed to have cared about everybody. And if you were, as far as we were growing up, if we were a little bit older than the person behind us, it was our job to kind of guide them and help them. And it was our responsibility. So it gave us somewhat of a being of authority too. Just let me get old enough, I'll tell them what to do. But we had to help them cross the street, help them to know where to go to places. We had a community center, T. and William Center. And that center was not comparable to Longwood. Separate was not equal, and it never is. Separate is never equal. Because we had a swing, a sliding board, and a merry-go-round and basketball court. Longwood had all the equipment and all. So it was said that we had a community center and Longwood had a community center, but they weren't equal. Sometimes you just don't always follow the law. And right up on this hillside, there's a pavilion. And we used to get old car hoods and sleds and things and come around the backside and go at the top and come down and sleigh ride. And sometimes we had adults with us. Next thing your mom would and we would all get together and go sleigh riding. And we would be bundled up and everything. And after about an hour, I guess, a little over, we were getting cold, but then there was some little white ladies that we just disturbed them. So they would say, the colored kids are in the park. Well, the police would come. They did not bother us, but they would come. Well, we'd run up the hill, over the hill, down the road, over this way. And it was fun to us. Tomorrow we'll be back and do it again. And so it was like tormenting them. But that was the best thing because we didn't have a hill. And I think the police realized these are just kids. And my dad was principal of Carver. My dad was used to being a sleigh rider in Pulaski. And he would come and stand on the street at the top of the fence and he'd watch us. And I didn't know one time that he was watching. I came off the hill and somebody flew off and somebody else would come off and somebody else. We're on old car hoods. And it was who can stay on it the longest. When I got to the bottom, I looked up and I saw my dad and I started to go with him to him and he waved me back. He was just there as a protector to see that we were okay. My mother never came. She thought we were going to get killed. So she didn't want to see it on her watch. But there were times that we did come north. And growing up in our community south, we had a blacksmith shop. We had the fish market, we called it. It was a restaurant. We had 6 churches at one point from the 1800s up until the 60s. And it was First Baptist was the first, 1867. And Elizabeth Campbell lived over on what is now Craig Avenue, but it was called Cove Road at that time. And she's in her home, started First Baptist Church. First Baptist Church is still on the same corner, building, newer building. And then at First Baptist, out of First Baptist came Shallow. Reverend Fox was the pastor of First Baptist. And after 10 years, he left and took 125 and started Shallow. Reverend Fox's headstone is in this cemetery, so the tallest one here is a large cross. And whites and blacks pooled their money together because he was so highly respected, so that he would have the largest headstone. And out of that, they had splits from First Baptist and Shallow, which created Mount Vernon and Calvary. And then from there, Bethel Church and St. John's Church, that's the Salem Rescue Squad, that was a church. Across the street is a parking lot now, that was St. John's. First Baptist is on the corner in Shallow, is right behind it. Shallow, from what I have read, was one of the buildings that was first built on the north side, and then later to the south side where it is now. During my time, Water Street was Water Street. Then in the 70s, it changed to South Broad, and Alabama Street, as we knew it, became South Market because they said they wanted to make things equal. So North Market, South Market, and same for Alabama Street became South Market. And so those are points of references. Also on the south side, going down the actual Water Street, there was grade A school, which later became Roanoke County Training School. And George Booker T. Washington actually came and spoke at the training school. We called it the old school growing up. At one point, the fire department decided that they would, after it became Roanoke County Training School in the 1940, it closed and it became a cannery. And people used to go there and can foods and all. Then after the cannery, the fire department decided to do what was called burning, experimental burning, to see how to put out fires. They burned it down. And that was their experiment. It didn't matter what it meant to us, that it was in our community. That was something to do. So then it became just a lot that took us from Water Street over to Chapman Street. And as children, we used that as a field. So we'll meet you at the old school field and we'll play kickball or baseball or sports, because it was from one street to the other. It was a nice long stretch there. And that was a little bit more land territory than what we had at the T.N. Williams Center. T.N. Williams' name came from Mr. Theron Williams, who was the principal at Roanoke County Training School. And when they closed and opened Carver in 1940, Mr. Williams became the principal at Carver. It's now fire and rescue building. It's on the left-hand side, right beside First Baptist Church. It still has the name T.N. Williams on it, but many people may not know who T.N. Williams was. And at one point, when Carver closed in 1966, they took all of our trophies and pictures and everything we had from Carver, and they moved much of that to the T.N. Williams Center. And then one day, they put it all out on the trash. Mm-hmm. It was class pictures and all of that. So I became later one of the busybodies, like I had seen in my time, to question, what are you going to do with the name of the building? Because they had put everything out and said they were changing, but they were going to put it back in. But you don't put things on curb on a rainy day. And then you don't put it back in. So I just constantly became the neighborhood watch, unauthorized, to make sure the name got put back, because we lose identity. We don't have anything now in that community that we can relate to other than First Baptist Church. Carver came in 1940. Carver became central to our lives. It was the church, the school, and the home. That was our triangle. And they all seemed to have been in cahoots together to control. And what we didn't get at church, we got at school, we got at home. And so we became a close-knit community family. We had different stores that were actually on the south side. How many of you know where Brooksburg used to be? It's right there across from the market. It's something, now it's a store, but it's closed right now, But I love Mr. Bird, but Mr. Bird knew the law and we could not sit down in Brooksburg. Now, those who were maybe 4 or 5 years behind, Brooksburg was a hangout. Maybe by the time Maxine and some of them came along, they could go in Brooksburg, sit down, but I always wanted to get on that brown stool and whirl around one time. But the law said I couldn't. I could buy snow cones. My dad was asthmatic, so at the end of every month, he'd pay his tab for the asthma medication. But I would say, Daddy, can I get a snow cone? He said, yes. So every time I'd go to get the prescription, which I was glad he had the asthma because I could get a snow cone, then it would say the asthma medication, and then it would say snow cone all the way down. Well, Mr. Bird had told my brother, and I didn't find out this until maybe 10 years ago. So my brother was talking, and he said, Mr. Bird said, the law said I couldn't sit down in Brooksburg, but the law didn't say I couldn't come behind the counter and make my own milkshakes. And I said, you were making milkshakes. You didn't tell me. He said, you would have cut in on my deal. And I always wondered why he was making milkshakes at home. We had a milkshake maker with the metal cup and all of that. And I said, you must be really smart. No, he's up there being trained by Mr. Bird behind the counter. And he never told me until, it's fairly recent. And so that was kind of the way we dealt with businesses. There was a store called Ken Platt. I'm not sure what his nationality was, but he would let you try on clothes. I never could try on clothes. I was an adult before I could try on something. So as a kid, like this child back here, we would just go in the store and they would put the clothes up against you. If it didn't fit, it just didn't fit. But at Carver, because Carver was consolidated school, it was from 1st to the 12th grade. So when I went to Carver, I was a 1st grader. And when I finished Carver, I was a 12th grader. And so they had a home ec department. And every day, my mother would say when I left for school, and she was a 1st grade teacher at Carver, she said, try to stay neat and ladylike today. And I go, okay. Well, kickball, that just got in the way. And part of my skirt or whatever would be torn off. And they would send me to the home ec department, whatever color that the girls had in the sewing machine, that's what they sewed us up with. So it might have been a green or blue, or we had all kinds of colors in our clothes. But that was training for this. We kind of looked at, well, this is training for home ec. Softball, ripping off the clothes. But all of those things became experiences for us of how to make do. It wasn't bad, but we learned how to kind of make do. And going down Water Street, there was a small hotel, a rooming house, ice cream parlor. It was over on what is known as, was Alabama Street, the South Market now. It's a lodge, but it was called Mays Inn. And the lady's name was Ethel May Myers. And she had, it was like a small restaurant, store, juke joint. And between there and what we call the fish market, they had a curtain. And so they told the young people, just go in and get the fish or get whatever it is. Don't go behind the curtain. Go behind it. You know, it's about like on Price is Right. It's curtain number one, curtain number two. But we never did. And Miss Mays stayed there because I used to use my lunch money. Because at Carver, we got out of school at 4 o'clock, started at 8. But you could go home for lunch as long as you got back within an hour. And Daisy Meldrum was in my class, and I'd give Daisy my 10 cents lunch money or whatever it was to go buy me mint juleps, sugar daddies, sugar babies, all of that. And that came from Mays Inn. Then Miss Mays moved to out on 220. It's a place called Fleet. That was where Miss Mays moved. And then that later changed. And then the Masonic Lodge moved into that building. I'm not sure if that's still active or not, but that's where they moved. The library down here, our families paid the taxes, but we couldn't go in it to look at the books. So our books came from T.N. Williams Center, Miss Jessie Pennick. They called it Jessie Pennick. It was named after Miss Jones's mother. And it was a small library, tiny, but the other books had to come from Carver or whatever. No matter what, we had to get our assignments done, no matter what. It wasn't fair, but you paid taxes and then you couldn't go to something. But then we addressed that later too. We're always addressing things. Carver started in 1940, and in 1966, it was integrated. My class was the last class to attend Carver. We always said it was the best class, or maybe it was the class that they need to stop with. But it was integration that changed. And that changed the course of many of the African-American students too, because they wanted to, and still do, wanted to finish Carver. At Carver, it was the heart of everything we did in the community. The concerts, the choirs, the ball teams, everything was kind of centered at Carver, including the teachers. So some of the teachers that we had were also the teachers that were in Sunday school and at church. And then by my parents being principal and teacher, we always had teachers at our house. And I said, well, I just can't get rid of these people. They're coming home with me now. How can I say I don't have my homework when they're looking at me? And those teachers clearly at that time were our teachers, later became our friends. As Mrs. Georgia Reeves was our math teacher. Mrs. Reeves was very strict, very professional. I always wanted to dress up like her and have a lot of brains like Miss Reeves. But Miss Reeves would say, people may talk about figures and figures don't lie. Here's your report card. And I said, oh, I hope the figures are hitting me right. And you knew you had to be your best. And Miss Jessie Jones had her saying, and it's etched on the walls at Carver today, good, better, best, never let it rest until the good is better and the better's best. And Miss Oliphant would say, excuses are tools of incompetence that build monuments of nothing. And those who specialize in them rarely use anything else, but there will be no excuses in this class. Okay, I got that one. And Mrs. Williams, who was the wife of Mr. T. and Williams, Miss Williams taught us French and English class and drama. And Miss Williams would say two men looked through the same hole. One saw the mud and the other saw the stars. Where's your vision? I said, I guess it better be the stars, because I want to get out of Miss Williams' class. But it gave us a challenge that wherever you are, you make the best of it and you get out and do something to help somebody else. And so that was always the focus. There was a store called J.J. Newberry's. It's a complex, some kind of something now. But that was Newberry's and Eagles was on the south side, but it was like a department store. At one point, you could not try on the clothes. Those people who were behind us could. In some cases at shoe stores, you couldn't try on the shoes. If you did, they had put a piece of paper or something inside the shoe so you wouldn't touch the shoe. But Newberry's became quietly integrated, as I can remember. Some guys from Addison, which was Roanoke, came and they were supposed to be real cool dudes. And they had gotten themselves some sweaters with emblems on it and all, and they were going to come to Carver to impress the girls. And it was, some of you may know, Lee Graves is still alive, Stan Hale, and Stan is not the Stan of Roman Tribune, but the Stan that was with the development, Mrs. James Bethel, and J.R. Hughes. J.R. later became a pastor, and Mr. Clarence Wright, I think it's Clarence Wright. They all came to Newberry's and sat on the stool. And they had their sweaters on and they were ordering. And the waitress didn't know what to do. What do I do now? They were nonviolent. They just came and sat down. And they actually said they didn't know what they were doing either. They were just getting something to eat before they went to go try to impress the girls at Carver. Well, they got served. And that's generally how it got immigrated. And by the time they got to Carver, my dad saw them and called the principal at Addison and said, some of your boys are here. He said, send them on back. So that's the kind of relationship we had from school to school, but Newberry's pretty much got integrated just like that. The movie theater, which is now a hotel, we could go and pay at our time, pay on the outside, but you had to go upstairs. You could not go in. And at one point when they started renovating, if you were at the opposite side, you could actually see where the brick was a little bit different. And we knew that was the entrance. You could pay the money, but you just couldn't go in. So some places just weren't places that we just saw as fun. Down here, Lakeside involved, you know, what would be the people of the Water Street District. But we could only go to Lakeside after Labor Day. 3 days after Labor Day, they closed the park and they reopened it for African Americans to attend. Those that came later were able to go. And I remember my class, we decided we were going down there and protest as seniors. So we just go down there and stand. And I know one person I know, his family is real fair skinned, actually could pass. And his cousin went down there and it was no problem until somebody said, you know, he's colored. And they closed the park that day because they realized, oh, and then later closed the pool so you could go. So I know it's important for people to talk about the wonderful experience about Lakeside, but to who? Not to me. And the same for when Carriage House or whatever it was called here at Longwood, when it burned down. Some people were very sad about it, but to the African Americans, it meant nothing to us because we couldn't come. So why should we be sad? I mean, we weren't happy that the place burned down, but we couldn't go to it anyway. Where the courthouse is now, off of Broad Street, that was Hoffler Funeral Home. And the Hofflers, Mrs. Hoffler was our business teacher at Carver. So you see, you had business there and you died. And became family friends too. But that was the Hoffler Funeral Home. They had the funeral home and they lived above. Then across from that, John Hancock had a barbershop. And down the street, the Earlums were electricians and they were professional people. And so we were surrounded by all different types of people. It didn't matter how many degrees you had. We were all Black, so we were all denied privileges. But they helped us to raise ourselves, to know, and to get an education. They were our foundation. And certainly the church was too. So keeping in line with education, the teachers would say, if you know what's best for you, you'll go to school. And my dad said, your mama and I are going to pay for you to go to school. Now, if you go down there to entertain everybody, we'll give you 4 years. You can pay for 5, 6, and all the other entertainment. And I said, well, I kind of like your plan too. So I did it in the 4 years. Respect and discipline, we clearly had that. And my dad would say, if I send your creative friends home, they will for suspension. They'll get 3 days, but you won't. I said, oh, that sounds good. And he said, you'll get a week and they'll be back in school and it's a lot to do at home. Well, but both of my parents were raised in Pulaski, and there's Nikki back there. Nikki's coming on later. And they were raised, and Mickey will give you the information, I'm sure, about the Capital Project. But both of them by 9th grade, you could only go to 9th grade. You could not graduate if you were seniors. You could not go to 12th grade. It was against the law because you'd be equal. So my grandparents, Harmon, sent my dad to Tuskegee, Alabama, to finish high school. So they were 9th graders. He was a 9th grader. They tested you at Tuskegee, placement test. He happened to skip 10th grade, but some people they would put back. And some of those students were sharecroppers. They didn't have as much opportunity. And so my dad at Tuskegee had to work. And his job was to shovel coal 5 cents a ton. 2,000 pounds, he got a nickel. And he saved that money so that we could have tuition. But he saved it too for his siblings to come. And he left an account when he finished. He had the opportunity, he always missed being home, which was Pulaski. But shoveling that coal, he would also learn how to do some electrical work, and he was learning how to do things, collecting another nickel and another nickel. And then my mother's family found out, he went off and he came back and all. So she went to Tuskegee and the same thing happened, placement test. And they said, well, where is this place called Pulaski? And my dad said, it's on the map. You'll find out one day. And so it is on the map. Nikki, I'm sure, will tell you about that. But my mother was taught by George Washington Carver. My dad worked for Dr. Carver. Mama had to fix his meals because she worked in the dining hall. And so they always had these little stories about Dr. Carver, and I'm going, this is another story. 30 years later, my dad became principal of Carver here. My mother became a first grade teacher, and I went all 12 grades, and my brother started in third grade because he started in Pulaski. So we made that whole Carver cycle. The teachers at Carver were, I would say 98% of the teachers had master's degrees. And they actually had more degrees than some of the white teachers. But the state of Virginia also paid African-American teachers to go out of the state to be educated. So every summer, my parents would alternate to get their masters. So they got their masters from Columbia University. They could pick the college that they wanted to go to. Some went to Pennsylvania, some went to New York. My parents went to New York because they had siblings in New York or cousins. So it was like family reunion at the state, paying for them not to go to Ronald College. We were only about blocks away. We could walk to college. But the state paid for them to go. So the opportunity was there for many African-American teachers to go ahead and get their masters. So most of the teachers in some of the same situation in Pulaski, they were well educated and they made sure we got it too. And we knew either we got it or we died. It was one or the other, because they were serious about it. And we looked up to those that did graduate and went off and came back. Again, they felt a sense of guiding us. So I guess that's a little bit about what I grew up with. And keep in mind, everybody has a story. It depends on what point of life came in, whether you were segregated to integration. There were different categories of being raised, but clearly the home, the family, the school, and the church, they were our guiding forces. And now you heard Hunter talk about the different things that are happening here at the museum. For 22 years, I think out of 28, I've been a ghost here for the Ghost of Salem in October. This year I won't be able to be here because I'm going to my college homecoming. But we portray the lives of people who are buried in this cemetery. The cemetery behind you is a cemetery set aside by Mr. Burrow for African Americans to be buried. It's closed now because it's full. It hasn't had anybody put in it for maybe 30 years or so. Yes. But you'll see the 3 big crosses there with this Salem citizens did a fundraiser to get that in so that people would not be forgotten on this side. This side is older than the other side, but this was the Black cemetery across the street. It's a white cemetery. And I always laughed and said, well, what could the dead do to the dead? You know, you can't be buried. But it was against the law to be buried together. And so they have every year a reenactment. And if you have not seen it, as I said, I won't be here this year, but we come alive that night as a walking tour and tell you about our lives during the 1800s and what we have done from their research.
So give it up. Do you have any questions for Dr. Harmon real quick?
Were all the churches, all 6 churches, were they all Baptist?
No, St. John's, Episcopal, Bethel AME, First Baptist, Shallow Baptist, Calvary was Baptist, Mount Vernon was Baptist. Those 2 were short-lived, but you know how churches go. You agree, you disagree, you move, you come back. And then after integration, the services in some of the churches like St. John's and Bethel, they were older members. And they moved to other churches, to St. Paul Church, and to Bethel AME down off of 220. But the part of those that went to Carver, because Carver was Roanoke County, it wasn't until the 70s that Salem annexed and became Salem, city of Salem. So Carver was once Roanoke County. And those students came from Bent Mountain, Catawba, Cave Spring, up to the Montgomery County line, Franklin County line. Those that got off on the Franklin County bus got on the Roanoke County bus. The Benton people, I think some of them said they rode 2 to 3 buses, and they would come by Addison. So a lot of people would say, well, why didn't they go to Addison? Addison was Roanoke City. We were Roanoke County. And up there, Roosevelt Road near the Mill Mountain Star. And a lot of those students left home at 6 or 6:30 to get to Carver by 8. And, you know, they were first graders and all. And one year we had the big snow in the 60s. And my dad asked the superintendent to send us the buses. He said, we can't send you the buses till Andrew Lewis rides the bus first. Everything we had to wait till Andrew Lewis did it first before it could come to Carver. And so it snowed, and we did not, the weather was so bad, the buses couldn't get back up on the mountain. So the children stayed in the neighborhood, and my dad had a list who would stay where, what children had what. We had 8, so we had some first graders. And just last year, I was in Kroger's down here, and a lady stopped me and she asked if I was Dr. Harmon. I said, I'm Marylen. And so she said, I stayed at your house as a child. And I said, you did? I said, what's your name? She said, Prestonia. And she said, I was one of your mama's first graders. Well, that was the best day of my life. And so they stayed 3 days. We had just gotten our freezer stock for the whole year from Christiansburg Locker. And they brought us the meat and everything for the family for the year. We would purchase it that way. They ate us out the whole days. And it snowed it was snowing up to the 2nd story of the house. We tumbled out, made igloos and all that. Well, we were out of school. I think we were in school for a whole 5 days that whole month. And if you could get to school, they would give you an assignment, you do the assignment. If you couldn't get to school, you weren't counted absent. And the kids kind of loved it because they were with their teacher, and I'm going on these little kids. But that taught us the spirit of giving too. And in the neighborhood, if a family could take 1, take 5, take 2, they just took the kids until finally we were able to get them back on the mountain. And then it seemed to have snowed every Tuesday. So they'd come off the mountain, get the assignment, go back up. But we could not use a textbook until Andrew Lewis had used the textbook. And half the time, the pages were torn out. So my girlfriend from first grade, we talk all the time. She's in White Plains, New York. She's a physician. And I would call Benton, and I said, Benton, what's on page 19? And she would read it, and I'd memorize it so I know my answer. And she said, well, what's on 37? I'd read it. But you better have your assignment when you got to school, because all of them was not going to take excuses. And so it made us resourceful, not fair, but you learn to compensate for the disadvantage. And then sometimes I would say to Mr. Prentice, Mr. Prentice, the answers are wrong in this history book. He said, well, don't look at them. You know? And we didn't know whether the Andrew Lewis people just put the wrong answers or they didn't know the answers. But Mr. Prentice said, don't look at them. And I had the spirit of wanting to know history because of Mr. Prentice. And Mr. Prentice said, you better sit up in here and pay attention. One of these days, you go into one of these places. And we were talking about Egypt. I said, he's out of his mind. We can't go to Lakeside. Now, how am I going to Egypt? And later in life, I made it to Egypt, and I said, Mr. Freddie, I made it. So the experiences that you have in life will teach you one way or teach you another. But I think in what we were taught not to hate, but to make a change. And this ballpark that's right here, some of my friends who I won't name, this was considered out of town. This part of Salem, Government Hill and all that was considered out of town. And we had names for different people. We were downtown as Government Hill, Craig Avenue, different ones. But those that lived out here, I was not part of that group at that time. I was with some others. But they knew how to pull the switch light to light up the field after they shut the lights down. And they would be out there playing softball and all that. Here comes the police again. See ya. And they'd go every different direction. And the police, I have to give them credit. They would show up. They just didn't bother us. Those little silly little kids, and they're all the kids. And so the ballpark, and oh, here's the switch right here. Open this, and lights would come on. Anybody else have questions?
A few years ago, there was a very good documentary about Carver School. Is that still available and shown anywhere?
Mike Stevens and I did that documentary. It was a course of maybe 5 years, 2,000 pictures we went through. And those pictures were pictures when Carver closed. They put out trophies, they put out pictures, they put out books, they put them all out on the street for the trash man. And so in many cases between T and Williams Center and Carver's curb, people just grabbed books and grabbed things. And I asked my dad, I said, well, what are we going to do with all this stuff? He said, someday you might be able to use it. And so we pulled from those pictures, and Mike and Clark and I sat down. We pulled it together, and we tried to include people from each decade. Those people who came from Cave Spring or came from, if you know where Lowe's is, out on 220, the St. Clairs and all lived there. So Dennis told about living there, Pinkett's Court. Larry LeGrand was where Home Depot is on 220. And Larry LeGrand was the first African-American that was Negro Baseball League. And Larry went to Carver, and he was a senior when I was a first grader. Larry had to go to the principal, who was my dad, and ask permission to go to be auditioned for the Negro Baseball League. And my dad said, Larry, you're a senior, you have to learn your part and play. You have to pass your test, and you better come back here with a contract. And he let him go. And so Larry used to pick out me all the time. And I said, Larry, what would you have done if Daddy had said no? He said, I was thinking about choking. And I said, then what? He said, then I would have gone into being a track star. But Larry was the catcher for Satchel Paige, who was the pitcher. And Satchel Paige used to come and visit Larry in the summer. He was more like an adult or his grandfather opposed to Larry. So we had professional ball players that came out of Carver, and Wayne Harris from here that lived over the hill became superintendent of Roman City School. Wayne and my brother were in the same class. And our first dog came from Wayne, but they would be in the basement, and my brother ended up being a chemist, but they were mixing chemicals, and I was the reporter. Mama, the basement's on fire. So, we encouraged each other and still do. But that's where the documentary came, so each could tell their story. And some of them told about those long rides and whole buses to get to Carver, no books. But you better, if you couldn't get a book, you better write one yourself because you better have that assignment.
And didn't Salem tried to change the name. of
Salem
Carver
tried to
School.
change their name 3 times. When we integrated, Salem became Salem Intermediate School. And then they told us that they were no longer gonna name schools after people. And then they named the school Herman L. Horn, who was the superintendent. So they named it after Dr. Horn after closing Carver. Then we petitioned, and Mike Bryant was white, but his grandfather, he was an assistant superintendent. And his grandfather put the brick on Carver. So Mike was in on signing the petition too. And so we developed the Carver Reunion Association and went before the school board, and it was Laura Spurlock, Maxine's aunt, my mom, my dad, Doug Dow was the president. And we petitioned, got the petition going. And we got the name back from Salem Intermediate. And then when they changed it back, they called it, which is now G.W. Carver. But when we went to school, it was just Carver. And one year, probably 1967, they sent my dad to UVA. No, it was before then, around 66, 67, to UVA to get him out of town. And they took the name off the building. And Mr. Duckweiler was like the community research reporter. He went and told my mom that the name is not on the building. And she got in touch with my dad back in town. He came. And then that's when that petition came. So it went from Carver to Salem Intermediate to G.W. Carver over a course of time. And then at one point they wanted to move Carver, move Berlin, school down Academy Street. They were talking about moving different schools, and Carver was on the plate, and we went back again. So it's always been a fight. And then they renovated Carver. It's a beautiful building, and they try to continue. There's a small museum inside that used to be my dad's principal's office. And people donate class pictures and things that got thrown away, you know, to add. But our history didn't mean anything, but it meant a lot to us.
Yeah.
All right, one more time, thank you.
I'm going to have to go.
Feel free to hear. You might already have it, exchange it for something else and get it done.